key.
Hey, you know, we can't never do nothing without laughing, right? My name is
That's
Nakia.
because they don't know what we're going through before we start this.
Not at all, sis, not at all. But it's all about being real
and raw.
Okay. Hi, my name is Nakia Franklin.
And I'm Vawn Gretta.
And welcome to this episode of the Real and Raw Talk Show. Where there are no boundaries.
And no judgments.
It is what it is, right? So we are so excited, as you can see, to be back. We have a returning guest that needs minimal introduction. Mr. Terrence Coffee of New York, New York.
Go ahead.
Oh my Jesus! I had a flashback to that day. Remember that day back in the day, sis? Not that long ago. Earlier.
We thought.
Yeah. What? Okay. My bad. Okay. Yeah. He's an adjunct lecturer at the New York University. Is the founder of Educate, Don't Incarcerate. Is a criminal justice advocate, speaker, and consultant. Professor Coffee is one who stands for justice, fairness, equality, and equity. God is the center of Terrence's life, and he fights daily for causes to reduce, if not remove, the impact of racial, economic, and educational oppression through the understanding of cultural and environmental factors. He is a forensic and holistic. He utilizes forensic and holistic approaches to understand the impact of the justice system, and continues to have an impact on over 2.2 million Black and Brown communities that encompass a marginalized society.
That was indeed what they call a mouthful, but you worked it, girl. And you guys, you remember last time, right, when Terrence was here, we learned about him and his journey to become the man that he's become today, and his why for his current journey that he works toward tirelessly to achieve. So we highly recommend you go back and watch episode 11 to understand what we have so much respect for regarding his background and his going way. He is a founder, a founder of Educate, Don't Incarcerate, EID, and a co-author of the book Race, Education, and Reintegrating Formerly Incarcerated Citizens. He's produced a documentary about juvenile justice in America. He's a public speaker, a lecturer of forensic justice and problem-solving courts, you guys. And so he's been honored by Citizens Against I can't read. Citizens Against, what is that?
Recidivism. You got this.
Recidivism. Okay. I mean, girl, that's why you should put your glasses on. Amongst other acknowledgments. I swear y'all, we professionals.
I'm pull out my computer.
No. They right here too. That's what's funny. This is what trying to be cute get you. Anyway, in 2020, he launched the I Am a Credible Messenger campaign, and the campaign is to amplify lives, experiences, and voices of those who are impacted by the criminal justice system. And now he's been featured in USA Today 2019 and Change.org. He's also been featured in the Community Technical Assistance Center of New York, the CTAC, and on the Ebony Collins Show in 2019, and the Blotter in 2020, and in the New York Daily News, and interviewed by none other than Katie Couric.
Indeed. So, yeah, we just want you to know our intentions with this episode, number 17, is to cause you to take actions to make differences in the effects that the criminal justice system, politics, and legislature has on the second chance community and minority communities, our Black and Brown communities, right?
Absolutely. And you know what? We have an amazing artist returning. His name is Taray Brooks. He just got back from Los Angeles. He's been out there between Los Angeles and Louisiana recording his new material. I cannot wait for it to come out. But the one you'll hear tonight is going to be a goodie, not necessarily an oldie. And so now it's time to get real
and raw.
So we want to hear from you. Obviously, our guest wants to hear from you. Terrence wants to hear from you. So you guys sit back and relax, start your own watch party. And if you would take a quick few minutes, if you're new to the game, go to www.streamyard.com/Facebook, and this will grant StreamYard access to see your comments so that they can pop up on the screen during the show and we can hear from you. We really, really want the engagement because that makes everything so much more spicy and wonderful. Okay, so post questions and share everywhere. Start your own watch party because it's time now to enter into the no judgment zone. Okay, I'm ready. Because I was jamming. Yes, I was. Okay, so we're here to talk about unpacking the narrative in the Black communities, politics, prison, and parole. So, sis, let's go ahead and bring Mr. Professor. Yeah, you got to put the prof in front of there. You can't just be like a professor. You got to put the whole prof in there.
Professor Terrence Coffee to the stage. Hey, sir.
I'm still on the real and raw.
That's all. Okay, I'm back. I'm back.
You did better this time, though. You've been practicing. You've been practicing.
Awesome.
You've been practicing trying to get his. What we call that, y'all? I don't forget this truck.
My groove on.
What?
Yeah, what up? Okay.
Oh my
God! Y'all told me dancing is not my thing. Just stick to teaching. You know.
That's all right though. You got it going on. No, you did that.
It's all about the effort. It's all about the effort. No effort, then you'll never know, right? All right. So we have a whole lot to discuss. We got a whole lot to talk about. So Terrence, our audience already knows about you, and those who have watched episode 11. Has had an opportunity to really get a taste of your flavor, right? And what you bring to the criminal justice aspect of life in general, and an understanding and experience of what it's like to have been a part of the system, okay? Prior to the system, going through the system, and then being on the other side of it to where you can actually make a difference, impact the world, and advocate for change. So I know that June of this year, you wrote a brief in Yahoo News about criminal justice reform and the need for President Joe Biden to dismantle the damage done by the 1994 crime bill. Since this is so fresh, I definitely wanted to start right here. So one of the things that you said was that you have been watching closely as President Biden has shaped the beginning of his presidency as one that champions equality and racial and social justice reform. But he has yet to fully address how he fixed the damage caused by the 1994 crime bill. You also said that the act is, in part, responsible for the severe over-incarceration of young Black and brown men who disproportionately populate the country's juvenile and adult prisons.
Yes.
And you ended with, he has the head of the judiciary. He was the head of the Judiciary Committee at the time and created and pushed the legislation through Congress that prompted men like yourself to be called predators.
Yes.
So if you can share with us, I wanted to preface that first. So, we can have the audience and viewers understand and look at what it is that we're going to be talking about to understand the depth of it, right? So share with us the current impact of the crime bill, the 1994 crime bill, and why it has such a significant impact on the system today.
Well, I want to first thank you and your co-host, your wonderful co-host, having me here once again. And it's just truly an honor to hang out on the Real and Raw. I really enjoy you ladies, your laughter, your joy, and all that. So I just want to say that first. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
And thank you. Yeah, that was one of the articles that was recently published, as you shared, in USA Today and picked up by Yahoo News in regards to the Biden administration and the criminal justice system as we know it today. To just kind of bring your audience up to speed in regards to what you shared, I was hoping we could run a clip and at any point, and I hope we have an opportunity to do that. However, if that's not able to happen for anyone in the listening and viewing audience, you can actually just go to Google and hit the Joe Biden 1993 on Congress floor, and that clip will come up on at the time when then Senator Joe Biden was advocating for the 94, what we know as the 94 crime bill. Now, let's be clear on something here right now. Prior to the passage of that bill, there was no such word, no such words or terminologies when we think about mass incarceration, carceral state, overpopulation. We knew that our criminal justice system acted, in a discriminatory way towards Black and brown communities. That was a given, and that started, that we have to go back to the Nixon administration along, and bring in the Reagan administration and the call to just say no to drugs, and then you have to go on into history into even once we got to the Clinton administration. Now, during this time, the Democratic Party was not seen as a party that was seemingly tough on crime, thanks to Jimmy Carter. We'll just leave that there for now. And we do know that, there was a seemingly increase in crime, but the rate of crime that was happening was not solely isolated to African-American communities or inner cities. The factors say, because we only represent 13% of the general population of this country, so there's no possible way that we could account for the level of crime that was happening. However, in an effort to appease Southern white voters, in an effort to appease a Democratic base that wanted to secure a strong presence in Washington during that time, the Clinton administration actually carried on was actually a continuation of the Reagan administration just saying no to drugs. Reagan and Nixon, they were saying words.
Mm-hmm.
What the Clinton administration did was put it into practice. We're going to effectuate this into some real-time action, and thus gave birth to the 94 crime bill. Now, prior to that, and why, particularly in regards to Joe Biden's and his administration, as I shared also in our article, I voted for Joe Biden. I don't want to say it was the lesser of two evils, but we had what we had to choose from.
Mm-hmm.
I think that while on the campaign trail, and really we can talk about the Biden administration on the campaign trail, which I want, that's part of it. But let's go back to 2016 with with Hillary Clinton, who was on the campaign trail. And it was during that period of time that no one could escape, particularly from the Clinton administration or Democrats themselves. No one could escape the impact of what the 94 crime bill meant to Black and brown communities with the over incarceration of young Black and brown people from across the country. No one, we could not escape the overpopulation. We could not no representative, no legal analyst, that could not be escaped. So while on the campaign trail, this is when Hillary Clinton began to criticize her own husband's legislation and saying, what we're going to do is have a more robust approach to justice reform and equity and equality, so on and so forth. She even advocated for ending some of the practices within the criminal justice system related to the 94 crime bill. Bill Clinton himself went to the NAACP to announce openly, and all this can be found on Google, that the 94 crime bill was a mistake, that they did not intend for it to have the impact that it did in Black and brown communities. However, it did. Hillary Clinton lost that bid. And after Hillary Clinton lost that bid, that was the last time we heard anything from Hillary Clinton in regards to any type of reform regarding the criminal justice system. 2020, Joe Biden runs for president, and while on the campaign trail, him and as well as Kamala Harris came under fire for their work in the Senate and her work as Attorney General in California for their positions on particular issues related to the criminal justice system and justice reform, which a lot of those things they were opposed to, particularly Kamala Harris. And Joe Biden himself had stood on the floor of Congress and advocated for this legislation by saying that it would be it would be young Black men such as myself, as we shared in our last segment, that would come up and bust his mother and your mother and all these people upside the head, that we were a cadre of youth from across the country who had no socialization skills. We had no consciousness. And however, and I think one of the most striking things about that speech, and it's why I always talk about it, and it's why, because I think it sets the tone for where we're at today with our criminal justice system and the narrative that surrounded young Black and brown folk from across this country, not only here in New York City. Through that narrative that we learned words such as super predator. It was through that narrative that we instituted a piece of legislation that said, and again, you can follow the script in the president's speech, that we were beyond rehabilitation. So the only response, and although, and this was one of the most critical parts about about that speech, he said that we were responsible for what was going on in those inner cities when we think about poverty, when we think about poor educational system, when we think about lack of access to employment opportunities, when we can go down the list of things. And he said, however, in spite of that, we may be responsible for it, but we can't still tolerate it. And the only way we can deal with this population is to lock them away. And that set the premises. That set the stage for what we now see as mass incarceration in this country. Because what happened, although those were federal laws, for those who may not know, we have a federal and state laws. And although that federal law was there at that level, what the federal government did was to incentivize states to adopt federal protocols such as 85%. So that's why a lot of folks you may talk to, we talk about doing this long stretch, you do 85% of your time. That was adopted from the federal level because of block grants that were given to states to militarize police, law enforcement agencies, to expand the prison the prison institutions, which brings into our relationship and contracts we had with private prisons, which brought into our communities, cutting off access to government program assistance, educational opportunities for federal Pell grants for educational purposes, which cut off access to voting, which cut off even access, as I said earlier, to a program. The 96 work program that was introduced by Clinton, which said that if you have been charged with a drug offense, you are banned from TANF and all these government programs for life. And most people don't know, when those programs were created, they were created for those individuals who fell 200, 400, 500, 600 below the poverty line. Now, I don't know who's more below the poverty line than a person getting out of prison with $40 and a bus ticket and dropped off in the middle of wherever they come from. And that's across the country. This is just not New York. I'm just saying this as an example. Right. And it was through that we began to see what we would see on television, because what Joe Biden did on that Congress floor when he began to write that narrative is he wrote a narrative that demonized, demoralized, and criminalized an entire community, particularly Black and brown communities, particularly. And states at that point took that mantle, took the funding, and executed that. And this is where anybody who here is who come from where we come from, this is what we call the jump out boys. They will come in kicking in the doors. This is when we would see young men being hit with time, with some what we call Buck Rogers time for sometimes a first offense. This is when we start seeing this pattern of incarceration at some of the highest rates in modern time. Now, again, I want to clarify, what the Nixon administration did was one thing. What the Reagan administration did was another thing. What the Clinton administration did was took that and brought it to life and gave it a body called the 94 Crime Bill, which led to what we're here to discuss tonight when we think about the words of mass incarceration, when we think about the work of Michelle Alexander and the new Jim Crow, or we look at Ava's the 13th, or when we look at so many movements across the country, and even former President Barack Obama passage of the Sentencing Reform Act of 2010, which sought to undo some of the damage caused by the 94 Crime Bill. And also, let me say on behalf of the Biden administration, and I'm just doing this because I like to play, I like to give it for what it is. And in that article, I commend the Biden administration for ending contracts with private prisons at the federal level. However, that was not translated to the states. Secondly, I commend the Biden administration for moving forward to make low-level crack dealers, crack offenders, beneficiaries under the First Step Act, which was passed by former President Donald Trump, and what we now know as the First Step Act. I commend his administration on that, and I even commend him for openly saying that that bill was a mistake. But that bill being a mistake and correcting it are two different things.
Right.
It's one thing to say, hey, I was wrong about something, when we have over 2.2 million people who have been disproportionately impacted by a legislation that disproportionately impacted their lives, our community, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not even saying there's nothing even, if we have crime that's committed, that's one thing. But to treat one group in a very different way than what you treat another group within a system, or you want to call it, that's no longer justice. That's an unjust system. Because electoral liberty does not look at a defendant and say, well, did you have crack cocaine? Are you black, et cetera, and look up under it and then pass a judgment or a sentence on you that has nothing to do with justice.
Exactly. And so with that being said, and Terrence, I really want to thank you for having the information and the knowledge base in order to bring the people present to what the challenges are on today. And see, you and I had talked, and one of the things that came out of in our conversation is not that the information is not out there. It's not reaching the appropriate people, and I look at how we have, the injustices is in the paper. It's all over the internet. For those who actually go through the criminal justice system and are experiencing what it's like to go through the process from that initial contact with authorities, whether it's a traffic stop, which begins your path into incarceration, because all they need to do is stop you one time and they have a file on you. And from there, the process begins. The rippling effect begins, right? And then you have everything that's going on in the news, people who are actually going through the criminal justice system that are getting out, that are saying, this is what's going on. This is my experience. While they're in the system, this is my experience. They're not having access to the world all the time in order to be able to communicate. We need help and we need changes in these areas. And there are policies that are being made, but we don't know what's going on, right? Well, there are people who know what's going on. The politicians know what's going on. The judges know what's going on. The DA's office, the prosecutors, everybody knows what's going on, including the people who are actually going through it, and nobody's listening to their voices. Those who have previously been incarcerated or who have gone through the system at one point or another, and it's trying to come out on the other side to make a difference and reintegrate themselves back into the community. But the information and access to that information is not being, people are not doing their own research.
Right.
Because I'm not going to put it on that is not necessarily available, because it is available, but people need to do their own research. People need to get out there and say, hey, just because a person went through an experience and was previously incarcerated does not mean that they don't know what they're talking about, does not, shouldn't be heard, shouldn't be listened to. But you got to take what's being provided to you, that information, and you have to act on it, and you have to get it to the right people who can fight for it, advocate and advocate for the change. We also talked about the fact that at one point they were able to get college degrees, get their education while incarcerated, right? And come out with enough information so they can be citizens who are able to contribute into the communities. But then when we have the issue with removing the box off of the application And we have the situation where we have people who don't have the experience and skill sets, yet they've been incarcerated. And yet you have to have experience in order to get a job. Where are we at now? What do we do? And sis, I definitely want you to join in on the conversation at any point. But I want to make sure that we hit these key points as well, because it's about policy. It's about people creating policies and out information nothing to do.
Yeah, Nakia, let me say this, and I want to make this clear. I came up in the Tupac era, and Tupac had a song that said, "That's just the way it is. Nothing ever seems to change." That it said that's just the way it is. And to say that's just the way it is, I lived on that and I ran with that and I believed in that because that's what I saw. And that's what a lot of us see in our communities. That's just the way it is. Poverty-stricken communities are still poverty-stricken. We have politicians that have came and made all these promises, and Vawn, we see our communities the same way they look 30 years ago. They look the same way right now, unless gentrification happens. And one of the things I like to share with that community, and I share openly a lot of, that's not just the way it is. That's the way it was constructed. Mm-hmm. Policies are things that set the boundaries and constructs of our society. It's just like when we ride down the street and we see a stop sign that says it's right there. That was put there. You can take that same sign, move it back, and it'll be somewhere else. And this is the way I look at policy, because it constructs the way things happen in our side. That's not just the way it is. That's the way it was constructed. And another part that you know, and I know we're going to pack each one of these, when you talked about that trajectory you shared about is part of the work that I'm doing with Cage Roses that focuses on the juvenile justice system here in the United States. Because for youth, particularly Black and brown youth, let's be clear about that, our youth have more interaction with law enforcement. They are 5 times more likely to be suspended or expelled than their white counterparts. They are 6 times more likely to end up being arrested for something, even if it was a schoolyard fight. And they are, I think, 8 times more likely to go into juvenile justice system. And once that happens, they are more likely to go into the adult criminal justice system. Here, those are the facts.
Right. And you if you look at it also with what you just said, it is very common for them to put, for the school system, okay, to put the Black and brown students in the behavior classes, the BAC classes, the disciplinary classes, because they don't want to deal with them. And it's not that they have a behavior issue. It's just they want that. Put those labels on the youth. It's easy for them to say, okay, we don't have to deal with them. We can ostracize them and we can set them up. Now we got a paper trail to show that they were disruptive or not credible as youth. And then when they start having those interactions with the criminal justice system, they can look back and say, oh, well, you was a trouble kid anyway. And that is not the truth.
That's not true, folks. Let's be clear on this. You see, most people, they talk about they have these conversations in silos. Remember when we started this segment, we talked about a narrative that first the Nixon administration started, and then the second narrative was what the Reagan administration started. Remember that what they used to call us the call our Black women and communities the welfare queens?
Yeah. We
talked. Our communities at that time, the entire Black communities, particularly those in poor Black and brown regions of this country, we were being demonized at that time. The narrative was already written. So if you've already done it to the male counterpart and you've done it to the female counterpart, the last component of that family structure is the child.
Right.
And so when you see by the time our children get to school or whatever, and they come from Black and brown communities, they're already from, what's the words we use? Oh, they're from disadvantaged communities.
Exactly.
That language has a whole lot entailed in it. That's a message to the mainstream society that this is where they're from. Now, follow that back up with Joe Biden on the floor of Congress. Remember, there's a cadre of young men and women who are born out of wedlock with no socialization skills. Their parents are this and that. We don't care what happened to them. We don't care how they got that way.
Right. And that's just the same as you looking at the programs and the coursework that's made available in these communities and these schools compared to the more affluent or white schools, okay, or specialized schools. Mm-hmm. They set it up to where, even with prime example, COVID, they don't have the computer access and equipment that they need, and they don't have the resources. They don't have connection, internet connection. But then you have other schools, some Katy out here in Texas, Katy schools, they gave all the students Apple computers, all of them, Apple computers, Apple laptops, all of that. But then you have Fort Bend and you have other communities where half the kids are having to borrow, or they don't have enough computers available. They don't have enough resources. They don't have enough technology, and they're having to find ways to piece things together for these kids.
That's just like back in the 60s when they talked about, everybody think that this is something new. Remember, they used to talk about, we get the Vawn, Gretta, we used to get the old textbook. What those more advanced, I don't even want to say advanced, well-funded schools got the new textbooks. Our kids were learning off the old textbooks. Our kids have always, and again, that's because there has not been an investment in Black and brown communities, particularly, and I'm going to keep saying this, poor Black and brown communities, because what society and what legislators and what people like to believe is that that's not worth it. We ain't gonna do all that. Vawn, Gretta, and Nakia ain't gonna get on here and talk about those poor Black and brown communities, because some of us Black folk, and I don't need the white folk, or they're gonna do what they're gonna do. Some of us Black folk forget what Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois described, that for those of us who have made it out, it becomes our responsibility to ensure that 90% gets out. So what
that's where I was gonna come in, which, excuse me for cutting you off, but that's where I'm coming in at, because we're doing a lot of talking about politics, and we're doing a lot of talking about the people who are making legislation and who are responsible for passing bills and all of this. Well, I'm over here in my head ticking on, what about the people that can do something about it? Which is us. We're watching the communities. So what are we doing? What are we doing? We, as in the individuals who are not in the pockets, so to speak. Do you know what I'm saying? And you just started touching on that, which is us. We're responsible for our children. We're responsible for educating them. And I always tell my children, and this is gonna, I always tell my children, it is my responsibility to educate you on your heritage and the things that matter. And the most important thing, I believe, for all of those who have come before us that have sacrificed in the worst way, whether it's their lives or their children's lives, and you go on and so on and so forth, the common ground that they had was the ability to be educated, right? They couldn't get a proper education. And if we take that part seriously and properly educate our children to the best of our ability, you don't have to sit on the throne. You can go to the library and put up a sign that says, I'm reading books at 5:00, and sit there and have these kids sit there and read books. And somebody can put $20 in there to give them a snack and some juice and read the books, many children's books written about the contributions of our people to this community, to this society. So if we educate them ourselves, then we begin to change the narrative from within. Because the more you know about yourself, the beauty of it, not the trauma only of slavery, but the beauty of everything else that we've done, which is so much. Then you start owning that beauty and you start making different decisions, right? Now that has something to do with your own personal story, right, Terrence?
Exactly. And that's where a lot of our work and our investment and our this gets lost in the and let me say, and the reason I'm saying this, and it's going to go right back to what Nakia and I were talking about, Vawn. See, Joe Biden stood with Kamala and acknowledged the damage and the atrocity of what transpired in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You see, when I heard that, and I'm not saying, I mean, I commend them again. I thank you, okay. But you cannot talk about the atrocities of something like that when that you taking one incident and forgetting the ongoing trauma that has been inflicted upon the same. That wasn't just that one event. Tulsa has always been our lives here in America and in this country. So what I'm saying, Vawn, is that same commitment that Joe Biden made in making that statement, and the same commitment that they allocated $80 billion a year to a criminal justice system, it's the same type of commitment that myself and advocates are calling on this administration to do in providing the necessary resources for our communities to do just what you said. There are too many black educators at these schools who go in their own pocket to try to provide the necessary.
You ain't lying, because I was one of them.
Resources just for the.
I was one of them. You're right.
Be able to. I have spoken. Listen. I have spoken and I have shared in a whole lot of places, and sometimes I look around and I see the way it under the Department of Education that's funding one school that's supposed to fund all schools with the same necessary educational experience. And don't forget what I said, funded by the same Department of Education. How in the world, when I go look at one school, I see something like I'm thinking I'm at New York University talking to sixth and seventh graders or fifth graders. Their school is equipped like that. And however, I can go on the east, whatever your east side, west side, y'all know what I'm talking about when I say west side, you know, how is the same school system operated, funded by the same Department of Education? How in the world did the funding stop that at 125th? You get what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. And they have the Robin Hood effect, and they have everything else that they pull funds from one school to support another school. But like you said, it's supposed to be dished out equally.
Equity.
But then
This is when we talk about equity and equality. This is what I talk about.
Exactly.
Equity and equality. If you don't want to send I don't care if you don't send your whoever. You provide us the necessary resources. We got some educated minds. We got the Vawn Grettas. We got the Nakia Franklins. We got who give us the necessary resource to educate.
Right. And then they try to keep us out of their schools, but we wouldn't be running to your schools if you provided us with the same equipment, equality,
and the same.
So we can teach our own students.
That's the equity I'm talking about. That's the equality that I'm talking about. Another thing that you shared about in regards to the criminal justice system, one of the things that we came to understand through research, that do you know that an individual who's incarcerated, if he has access to education, he goes to 50 to 80 to 90 to 100% less likely to recidivate again.
Absolutely.
Because now he has purpose. He has tangible opportunities to build a new life for himself.
Exactly.
I liken what we're talking about tonight, and everybody know I like Spike Lee, and Spike Lee made what do you call this company, Vawn, Gretta, 40 Acres and a Mule. Well, I want to educate our background.
Black. Yep.
Let's give a backdrop on what 40. That wasn't just something to say, y'all. Actually, that was Field Order number 5, introduced by the Lincoln administration after Emancipation Proclamation. And 40 Acres and a Mule was a legislation that said we're going to give these newly freed slaves the necessary resources that they need in order to become a part of this economic and system in which we've just taken them, coming out of slavery. Because what they understood, if they did not provide this population with the necessary resources, and the land was important, like we know now.
Absolutely.
So that land was to build their own houses, plow their own fields. The mule was the working mechanism for these people to be able to take care of themselves. Because what we understood, if we did not provide the necessary resources for this population in order to be self-sufficient and become a part of this economic system in which they were being released, that same population would be exploited by the same system. And we did not learn from history, because now introduce what we call, and most of you guys may not know, called the Black Codes, vagrant laws, pig laws, which were introduced now to incarcerate free slaves that put them back on those same plantations that they had free from legally.
Right.
Legally.
And that's why we have.
Remember that word I said? Legally.
We have different communities, such as, not plugging, but Sleana Plantation, where you have all these different communities within a community that has the name plantation. Well, a lot of it is they're trying to get rid of it or trying to change it, because at the end of the day, they're all plantations, and that's where slaves were. That's where the disenfranchised were being sent in order to work. So, even just choosing a community in which you live in, you have to be mindful of what that history is. You got to do your research. And it's so important that we don't forget. A lot of our children, a lot of our people don't want to learn the history, don't want to know the history. They don't realize how important history is, and how if you learn your history, you won't repeat your history. And we also have to be responsible. We have to be responsible in saying and knowing that a lot of our older, more senior population, depending on their age bracket, right, didn't necessarily have the level of education that they needed in order to support the newer generations in teaching them and educating them and supporting them and setting them up for that success. So it's important that we pull that out, because they may not necessarily know how to read or write or know what books to get. And they still have enough knowledge and experience, personal experience, to where they can teach and educate that way. So I don't want to be irresponsible in saying, yes, we have the capacity to teach our own kids, because some of us don't, realistically. And that's why we have to depend on these teachers. Okay. We have to depend on the educational system, but we don't need teachers who are not interested in educating our children. We need teachers who are really there to make a difference, to educate them, don't ostracize them, teach them everything that you got, because you have the information, you have access, you have the capacity to feed what is needed for our Black and brown communities to be able to grow up and make a difference and make an impact in the world. And sis, I want you to get in this conversation and eat from this. I can't hear you, baby. You're on mute. You're on mute, sis. You're on mute. I need to hear your voice in this conversation, baby.
Look at it. It's a community effort.
You got that hand
You know what I'm saying? It's a community effort. It's a community effort. We know, I'm saying we, educators, we know that you don't have the ability, but let me go ahead and, be a sounding board for the educators. Yeah. It is so hard to fail a student, because you have to go through so much crap to actually fail a child, get in touch with the parents. And these parents are lethargic when it to educate their children for the most part. Not people like you, not people like me. And these teachers are going beyond the call of duty every day. And some of them are just tired and beat down. Okay, with these little pissant children that come to school like somebody owe their ass something. You know what I mean? And you bring in everything. You can't even leave your room to go take a pee. So, because you gotta watch these little animals. No, but we know that, and that's why I'm saying it's there are plenty of people who don't have the capacity to teach their children, but that's why it's a community effort. And one of our audience members said something about waiting for people to do things for us, waiting for the system to do this and do that. And I kind of feel where she's coming with that, because at the end of the day, when I say we, I'm literally mean all of us. You know, we have an area in this town called Third Ward that is very rich in heritage. Even the buildings and the structure people want. You mentioned something about gentrification that's happening right now because they always wanted it, because the history is so rich. It's so full of culture and beauty that we are not holding on to it. But there's so many great things still happening out there, and it's our spot. Back then, they had everything. They had the pharmacy, they had the eye doctor, they had the I'm gonna go ahead and plug Poindexter Dental because his dad was there for a long time and he's been a supporter of mine in the past. The dental spot, everything was there, and as a community, we took care of it. But we're falling away and we're doing a lot of talking, but we're not checking the heart of our community. The heart is not pumping like it needs to pump. We're not connected like we need to connect. And we keep hearing it over and over. We hear it. What I'm saying is nothing new under the sun. But if we get serious about connecting and keeping our people taken care of and fed and clothed and educated and watched for and cared for. And like you said, not letting certain teachers not teach them, because we know instruction is, what's the word I'm looking for? It's subjective sometimes. Right. Then we automatically put a demand on the system to filter in the necessary resources that they're supposed to be getting. Because the demand is there, because united we stand.
But I want to interject for everyone, because I don't want us to, particularly any of the viewers, I want to the civil rights movement from the NAACP, the SE, you know, all those organizations. I sometimes I hear these conversations and I'm sometimes torn, and let me really honest to God tell you that I am torn, because Vawn, what you just shared, it was right around 1965 to 1970 when we saw a disconnect that began to happen in this country, because what we thought as a people, that after the passage of the civil rights in this country in 1965 under the leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that a lot of us thought we had gotten there. We thought that great Black awakening, you know, James Brown, I'm Black and I'm proud, and et cetera, et cetera. I think that somewhere after Dr. King's assassination and the introduction of those, I believe that there was this thing in Black America that we had gotten there. But I want to be very clear. And I hate to say, I hate to be the one to say that, because when we see the practices, because that's what brought about the Nixon administration. You know, I connect the dots.
Right.
Because
connect the dots,
history in 1965, during that era, we had the highest vote, the highest number of Black folks voting in the country. Outside of the Emancipation Proclamation, we had the highest turnout of African Americans, not only in the country, I mean, in the Reconstruction era, but also during that era. We had more professionals coming out during that era. We had more politicians coming out in the era. We had more movements coming out in that era. Just if you look at the trajectory, and it was in 1972 in that era that Nixon said, "We got to do something." These Negroes are they're proud, and they began to demoralize.
So what you're saying is there was a unification happening that put a demand on the powers that be to pay attention.
It got to
United we stand.
And what the Nixon administration did was move to say, well, we're going to have to create this war on drugs.
Yeah.
And then that's where in that script, and see, I like to give people history. If you follow history, you'll see that. And this was no more different. You know, my mom used to always say, baby, it ain't nothing new under the sun.
Amen.
That's right.
After the Emancipation Proclamation, I'm going to take y'all back in history, and we're going to bring it right back. After the Emancipation Proclamation, they released a worldwide, nationwide movie called "The Birth of a Nation." It showed the impact. What they said, why the Emancipation Proclamation was a terrible move, because we're going to rape their women. We lazy Waller eating ain't gonna do
fried chicken cooking.
That happened. Fried chicken eating. Look at them. And that's when you saw the big lips, and we was lazy eating up, ain't doing that. Now, how in the hell do you call the same people who were the economic backbone of
the center, the hub of the reason why of everything?
Now y'all getting it. Now it was the same thing. We were empowered after the Emancipation Proclamation and the Reconstruction.
Y'all learning, y'all listening.
We saw the Black Power movement. Even back then, and the same thing happened once civil rights hit. Look at the same era, and now we got to break this down some kind of way. I like to give you facts, and my mom, I'm gonna tell you, my mama saying ain't nothing new under the sun. Nope. So the same practices that was used then was used after the passage of the civil rights in this country by the Nixon administration, carried on by the Reagan administration that led. I keep it in line for you. I don't mean.
And so what you say, what you're doing right now, Professor, is you're teaching. Okay, you are educating, and because you are educating, right? People are learning, and if you learn, you know, and when you know, you do.
So you want to know the maltreatment of young Black and brown folks and Black people around here in this country? Y'all see it. I'm gonna give y'all facts, because you remember. I'm gonna give y'all some facts. Anybody who listens to me, who know who you been, where I'm from, on our clothes, when we got that DOC, they say property of.
Right.
Now y'all hold that there. Hold that when I say property of. Because if you go back into history with our Supreme Court, they asked, were African Americans fully, they say no, actually they 3/5 of a man, so they don't have a right to own this, and they don't have the. You see, although we passed and we transferred from that. And with paper, the mentality was still the same. That's why we see when we talk about voting rights, they still passing these crazy. That's why, because America still struggles, and we don't like to say it. I know Black folks sometimes don't like to say it. What America still struggles with the idea of African Americans being fully integrated Americans.
Social integration.
What they do toward those people of color in this country, because they still don't actually see you as a human being, because the Supreme Court determined back in you was only 3/5 of a man. You're not a real functioning human being. See, that's at the heart of what we're discussing. That's at the heart of it. So people try to ask, I look at things and say, well, why? Well, because they don't really see you as a human being. They still see you just like the DOC right here, Department of Corrections, on those clothes that say property of. That means you somebody's property. How many? And
if they don't see you as a human being, then you are mentally brought into that system. And if you don't have the strength of somebody telling you opposite, then you feed into that and you receive it and you own it. And you function out of it.
Everybody know what I'm about to do. Who knows me?
Yeah,
you know me.
James Baldwin.
Let me tell my young brothers out there something what Mr. Baldwin said and fire you next time. And I'm going to read this and I'm going to do my best to shut up.
He's like, start the pass. I'm going to read this and then I'm going to close.
Because you know we only had an hour. I'm just saying.
Y'all know y'all got to do this again messing with me. Y'all don't ask me to come and pack nothing. We ain't having no kumbaya around no fire and say go home.
Go read, Pastor.
Let me highlight this one statement.
Go ahead.
Of
read that.
That's done. This is what James Baldwin wrote to our young black men who may be hearing this, to those young black sisters who may be hearing this, to those black mothers, whoever may be hearing this. You can only be destroyed by believing that you really are what the white world calls a nigger.
Amen. And that is why social integration is pivotal in the Black and brown communities. And we talk about equality. We talk about inclusivity. We talk about diversity. Well, if we don't do our part to contribute back into our communities and not wait on somebody else to do it for us or before us, because they're not going to do it. Vawn talked about what are we doing to give back? That's why we have to put our money back into the communities. That's why we have to put our resources into the communities. That's why we have to go into the school systems and fight and make a difference. And don't let nobody tell you what your children can and cannot do and what they're not capable of and who they are. You have to be the determiner of that. You have to make that difference. Terrence, thank you so very much for being here. I just want to make a quick drop of how they can reach out to you. You will be back. We're going to be doing some additional things later on, coming September and moving beyond that. Vawn and I are going to have our final thoughts on the after the show after party that starts at 10:15 p.m. Refresh your computer, come back on, or the link and come back on. But Terrence, before we get off of here,
wait. Let me clarify that real quick, sis. You guys, what she's saying is the after the show after party, where we're gonna be joined by a comedian, the Slappy Payne. So when she says refresh, those of you who are watching on Facebook or YouTube, when this show is over, refresh at 10:15, and then when you come back on those two platforms, it'll populate for you. And that way you can see.
Already physically fresh. It's the link.
Yeah,
right.
I hope to God they know what I'm saying. You dig? Go ahead. I know you were giving Terrence his chance to give his closing remarks.
Yeah.
How can people get in contact with you?
Yeah. You can find me on YouTube at Educate, Don't Incarcerate. And also, I want to share that if you want to see, hear more of what I'll be doing in the upcoming months. On October 20th, I'll be hosting a mental health webinar on the criminal justice system, and that's with Hudson Valley Professionals. You can find that on my LinkedIn site. Also in November, I'll be speaking at the International Criminology Conference on November 4th. And also you can find me on the cover of Thoughts Magazine. We'll put that information in there for you. Y'all see I'm doing the shout outs, right? And also I will be having It's Coffee Time will also be hosting our show at the Montauk Club on Fridays beginning in September, a live audience. So if you're in the New York area and you want to come in and you want to see the broadcast live, please come out. And I am looking forward to coming back here on The Real and Raw. Nakia and Vawn, Gretta, because y'all know this is a continuation of this conversation.
Yes,
leave your audience hanging like this. We got to get the probation and parole reform.
Oh, I know, right? We couldn't even get. I try to bring it out a little bit, but we couldn't even get all into it. But
what happened is what needed to happen. I know. I want to thank our thank you to our audience so much for being so engaging, and to you, Terrence, for being so like open, authentic, which we knew you would be, transparent and vulnerable, in the no judgment zone where there are no boundaries. Hello, right, Nakia?
Right, there are no boundaries and no judgment up in here.
So guys, don't forget to join us.
Yeah, join us.
And stay watchful, because we're going to post that information you didn't get a chance to look at
in just a second. And definitely reshare this content with everybody that you know. Come back and see us, spend time with us. And this is the Real and Raw Talk Show, where there are no boundaries and no judgment. Oh,
okay, so you guys, Terrence, you hang out for a second, and then you guys have a beautiful, beautiful night.
And Kizzy, I heard what you said, and I appreciate what you're doing for your children, and that's what we have to do. We got to do our best. Join us after the show, after party. Sis, we got to go.
For real?
Terrence,
we could stay. Y'all, she doing the Louisiana goodbye. All right. Okay, now. All right. All right. Love you. Talk to you later. Okay. All right. Okay. See you later. All right. Okay.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Real and Raw Talk Show with Nakia Franklin and Vawn Gretta. Remember to like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel today. A special thanks to our guests, sponsors, and audience members. We are grateful for your support of our programming. If you would like to be a guest or sponsor of one of our shows, please email us at info.realrawtalkshow@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. This has been a Wisdom Entertainment production in association with Social Integration. The views and opinions expressed on the show do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Real and Raw Talk Show with Nakia Franklin and Vawn Gretta. Any content provided are opinions and do not intend to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone or anything. Stay connected and join us for our next conversation where there are no boundaries and no judgments.